A couple days ago, game developer Larian Studios did a small study on what gamers want from RPGs. It's a survey that yielded 15,481 responses, the results of which Larian Studios made public through a PDF that contains various graphs conveying the data. Topics they covered include most important features in an RPG, preferred camera perspective, favorite styles of combat, ideal game length, and more. It's very interesting stuff. Before we begin though, it is worth noting that because Larian Studios is best known for their computer RPG video game series Divinity, most of the people that they drew in for this survey were PC gamers, as you can see in this graph. Doesn't mean that this data is completely useless or biased, but it's important to keep in mind that this study isn't all-encompassing either. With that in mind, let's dive into this data on what people look forward to most when it comes to role-playing video games, starting with preferred type of RPG. The graph lists 6 types: computer RPG, action RPG, JRPG, MMORPG, strategy games, and co-op multiplayer. As for what these colored bars represent, that information can be found in the legend on the top right corner. The colors I want to focus on for the purposes of this video are purple and green, which represent love and like, respectively. So, looking at the graph, naturally, considering the type of crowd that this survey drew in, computer RPG was the most preferred type in this survey, with the highest number of people who love it. And by computer RPGs, they mean games like Divinity, Pillars of Eternity, Neverwinter Nights, Fallout 1 and 2, etc. From there, coming in at a close second with a good combination of loves and likes was Action RPG, which encompasses games like The Witcher, Dragon Age, Diablo, Dark Souls, Skyrim, etc. Me personally, action RPGs are definitely my favorite. I love how rich, seamless, dynamic, and active these types of games can be. I have fond memories of games like the Elder Scrolls series, Oblivion in particular, and the rich world of Witcher 3 never ceases to amaze me. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy other types of RPGs. I do like my fill of computer RPGs and JRPGs even. Although speaking of JRPGs, it looks like it didn't fare so well in this survey. Neither did MMORPGs or co-op multiplayer games for that matter. Strategy games did decent though, coming in at 3rd place. Again, not all that surprising considering that this survey is skewed more towards PC gamers. So overall, what does this data tell us? From my perspective, it seems as though in our modern day and age, when it comes to RPGs, most people are looking for rich, seamless, expansive, active experiences, which is what many computer RPGs and action RPGs offer. I think JRPGs are less popular with certain crowds because they often involve a lot of menus, random encounters, transitions from exploration to battle, etc., making them less active experiences. As for MMORPGs, due to their massively multiplayer nature, they don't always offer the richest, most seamless role-playing experience. Finally, the low popularity of co-op multiplayer games in this survey tells me that when it comes to RPGs, people don't deem co-op a priority. Moving on, the next graph shows us data on preferred types of camera in RPGs. 3 camera types are listed here: isometric or top-down, first person, and third person. Once again, due to the type of crowd that the survey drew in, isometric or top-down took the lead. This is the same perspective that Divinity games have. From there, coming in at a close second was third person, with first person coming in last. I definitely get why more people would prefer an isometric or third-person perspective. More often than not, people like to see their characters in action in an RPG, and first-person just doesn't allow you to do that. At the same time though, first-person does have an advantage in that it offers a more immersive experience in terms of role-playing. Me personally, I love it when games give you the option of quickly changing between first-person and third-person view. It's the best of both worlds, and it's one of my favorite aspects of Bethesda Game Studios RPGs. As for isometric or top-down view, I would say that out of these 3, it's my least favorite, mainly because I think it offers too limited a view of the world. The camera's just kind of stuck there in that little square area. You can't really look past like you could with third or first person. At the same time though, an isometric perspective does give you a lot more information and a better viewpoint of what's going on around you at any given point in time, which can work in a game's favor if implemented properly and if it suits the particular game. So while I do prefer the other perspectives, I'm not against isometric viewpoints either. I feel like all in all, it's a pretty close battle between the three. I think they all have their value and place on a game-to-game basis. Moving on, the next graph showcases data for the most valued features in an RPG. The features listed here include rich story, tactical combat, character progression, replayability, challenge, loot, crafting, and 2 listings for co-op, which is most likely a typo or a mistake. Coming in first place for most valued RPG feature is rich story, and I couldn't agree with this more. Nothing ruins an RPG quite like a bad or shallow story. Story is the glue that binds the entire RPG experience together, and it's what keeps players invested in the long journey ahead. So yeah, a good, rich story is absolutely vital, and I'm glad so many others agree. Coming in second place is character progression, which I also agree with. Just as important as the story and world is the player character and the player's sense of development. If the story is what keeps players invested in the long journey, character progression is what makes that journey bring out a sense of satisfaction. It's what makes it worth it. I also think it's important that non-player characters have their sense of progression as well, as it contributes to making them feel alive and therefore immersing players further into this world. Coming in third is tactical combat. It has a decent amount of purple and green, in this case signifying very important and important, respectively. But the most votes for this category went to moderately important, the yellow. I do think you need a good combat system for any RPG, but I also agree that it's of no value without a rich and dynamic story, world, and characters. Elder Scrolls Morrowind is a great example of a game that had a somewhat lackluster combat system, but is still praised because of its immersive world and compelling stories and quests. From there, features like replayability, challenge, loot, and crafting are all valued relatively equally in a lower tier. Among these, challenge is deemed more important by a significant amount of people, while crafting is deemed as not that important by many, as can be noted by the blue bar. Speaking of the blue bar, you can see it shoot to the sky in the co-op category, which tells us once again that most people like their RPGs to focus on a great single-player experience above all else. Next up, we have a graph for combat style preferences in an RPG, with a survey listing turn-based, real-time, and real-time with pause. It's a pretty close match, but it looks like turn-based barely edged out the rest. This might seem strange to some of you, but keep in mind that Larian Studios' Divinity games are turn-based isometric RPGs similar to games like Fallout 1 and 2. So when you consider that most of the people who took Larian Studios' survey are fans of their games, the results aren't really all that surprising. From there, real-time and real-time with pause are neck on neck at a close second. My personal preference is real-time combat, but I don't mind the other two either. Much like with the camera perspectives, I think that all three of these combat styles do have their value and place in different games. Moving on, the next graph is a pie chart that shows data on ideal length of an RPG. The most popular range was between 40 to 60 hours at 28.6%, although 100 plus hours and 60 to 80 hours came in at a close second and third at 24% and 22% respectively. If you look at this data in terms of how many people wanted their RPGs to be at least 40 hours long, that's 86.7% of survey participants. On the other hand, if you look at how many people wanted their RPGs to be at most 40 hours, that's only 13.3% of survey participants. So yeah, what this tells us is that people want to spend quality time with their RPGs. I do think that 40 to 60 hours is a pretty good sweet spot for an RPG though. I can hardly find the time or attention span nowadays to spend 100 hours on a game. Next up, we have another pie chart, this time for preferences on protagonist, with the options being pre-written character, custom character, and no no preference. Almost half of the survey participants preferred a custom protagonist. 36.2% didn't mind either way, while only 14.7% preferred a pre-written protagonist. Me personally, I definitely find myself more immersed in an RPG when I can create a custom character, like Skyrim's Dovahkiin. But I can't argue that stories are often tighter when they are centered around a pre-written protagonist, like Witcher 3's Geralt of Rivia. So I don't know, it's a toss-up, it depends on the game and the kind of experience I'm looking for. If I had a gun to my head though, I would definitely choose custom character, but I'm not against pre-written characters as long as they're well written. This finally brings us to one last pie chart that asked participants if they spend the majority of their gaming time playing solo, co-op, or competitive. A resounding 79.1% said playing solo, only 15.5% said playing co-op, and a minuscule 5.4% said playing competitive. Yup, solo for me as well. I do play multiplayer games with my friends and have a great time, but I'm definitely more into single-player experiences. When it comes to transporting myself into another world, solo play is where it's at for me. Which is why when it comes to RPGs, I personally don't care much for features like co-op and don't want developers to focus on things like these. Don't get me wrong, while the idea of something like a single-player Elder Scrolls game with optional co-op does sound enticing to a degree, I don't want the need to implement co-op to compromise the single-player experience. It's a whole different ballgame when you have to balance and build a game around 2 players rather than 1. I'd much rather have a fully fleshed out single-player experience than a co-op experience with compromises. Alright, so to summarize the results of this survey, most preferred computer and action RPGs over other types. They prioritized a rich story and character progression as the most important features. They were evenly split when it came to camera perspective and combat styles. Most don't want their RPGs to be less than 40 hours long. Most prefer to create their own custom character over playing a pre-written character. And finally, most agree that multiplayer is not an important feature in a single-player RPG experience. Now, as I said before, this survey isn't all-encompassing. If you did this survey in Japan, there would probably be a lot more enthusiasm for JRPGs and the like. If you did the same survey with console players primarily, some of the results might differ, so on and so forth. At the same time though, I feel like these survey results aren't too far off from the general consensus, at least when it comes to Western gaming culture. I feel like most gamers I've met have expressed very similar preferences for their RPGs, particularly when it comes to the most important features. That's just my personal experience though, and at the end of the day, these preferences are all subjective, so your opinion might vastly differ from the survey results. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do these results fall in line with your own preferences, or are they way off? What would be your responses to these questions? Let us know in the comments below. I hope you found this video useful, and if you enjoy my content, I hope you'll consider supporting me on Patreon to help our community remain independent from third-party sponsorship and corporate interference, and to be further updated on all things video game news, reviews, and discussions. Stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!